Hi, everyone. My welcome to Buenos Aires and City of New York webinar on open data. You are currently live streaming an event which is part of the Open Data Week 2019. The Open Data Week started on March 1st and goes on until March 9th. Feel free to check out other events by going to our website, open-data.nyc. We are very happy to co-host this panel from some of our friends at the City of Buenos Aires who have been working on the open data realm for a long time. And, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Faraz Ahmed. I'm a data scientist at the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. And I'm also part of the open data team. So you're going to see my face for the next 40 minutes. Just a little housekeeping. The format of the event is that we will be spending the next 25 minutes talking about the discussion of open data in both cities, and then we will be opening up, we'll be taking some of your questions, and I'll be throwing them to our friends at Buenos Aires and also my colleague here at the NYC Open Data team. So if you can ask any questions you have in the chat, I'll be monitoring that throughout this event, and then we'll be, answering some of those in the end. Another thing, this webinar is recorded, but your names or email addresses will not be recorded. So there's privacy over there. Just a heads up that if you're not able to listen throughout the webinar, we will be recording it and also sharing it within our networks, very soon. So on that note, I would like my colleague here at the New York City Open Data team to introduce herself and give us a little bit of landscape of the city of New York.
I also have another role as the Director of Civic Engagement and Strategy with the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, also known as MODA, which is the team that both Faraz and I are a part of. I just want to echo Faraz's thanks to our colleagues from Buenos Aires for being here with us this morning to help celebrate New York City's Open Data Week. We're also looking forward to celebrating Open Government Week next week, I think starts March 11th, which is something that Buenos Aires is going to be celebrating and other places around the world. So just to share a little bit about the city of New York, some of you might have heard of this place. It's in the United States of America on the East Coast. We're a big city. We have 8.6 million people who call this place their home. We get an average of 50 million tourists annually. So lots of people visiting this place. We're small. We're on 320 square miles. We're made up of 5 different kind of geographic counties that we call boroughs. So that's Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island. You might have heard of these different places. And then the government here, we have about 300,000 people who work for the city of New York. So the reason why I like to share that is that we are an enterprise level organization that is also hundreds of years old, trying to operate to serve the New Yorkers and those who commute in and out of the city, those who visit the city. And that's a big responsibility, right? We have 1.1 million children who go through our public school system, 35,000 police officers. We're pretty big. And I just like to share that as context before sharing a little bit more about New York City's open data program, which is what we're here to talk about. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what an open data program is, it's typically about taking city agencies' data and making it available to the public to use however they'd like, typically for free. In New York City, that's what we do. We have a platform at nyc.gov/open-data if you feel like pulling it up over the course of this conversation that we're having today. We have more than 2,300 data sets on the platform that have been published by more than 70 city agencies over the last 7 to 9 years. The program here in New York City is powered by law. So we had an original law passed March 7th, 2012, requiring all city agencies to make their public data available on one platform, which is our open data platform. The platform sees about 30,000 visits on average to the site per week. And we know that there's a variety of different people who use the data. So city staff use the data a lot. It's actually an easy way for them to share data across agencies. A lot of nonprofits use the data because they work very closely with the government. Students, researchers, people in academia are using it. We also have a pretty exciting and robust civic technology community here in New York. So a lot of people are looking at the data as kind of hobbyists or looking to build new things, trying to figure out how they can help improve their city by using the data. So it's really, in my opinion, a very exciting program. There's never a dull day. Every data set is different. Just yesterday, as a part of Open Data Week, Faraz and I were up at a local university sharing with different students who are interested in entrepreneurship, how they could use the data, and Faraz showcased a data set about dog names, because if you own a dog in New York City, you have to register it with the city. So we get this interesting data about dog names and dog breeds. I showcased a data set about street trees, all of the trees that are on the sidewalks in New York. There's more than 500,000 of them. You can see what kind of species they are. So those are just some examples of the kind of data that we have.
I'm Ramiro Fernandez. I'm data scientist from the open data team of the city of Buenos Aires. I introduced the city. Buenos Aires is the capital of Argentina. It's the biggest city in the country, almost 3 million of population. It has a political status as a province since 1994. So it's a city, but it's huge and has a relatively high budget in comparison with other provinces and states like in the United States. Or from the other provinces of Buenos Aires, is the third most populated agglomeration in Latin America, behind Sao Paulo and Mexico City. Horacio Rodriguez Larrete is our mayor since 2015, and we have 14 ministers of government, but way more agencies, and there are a lot of agencies which share their data. And so let me tell you a little bit of the background of the policy, open data policy. It began in 2012 with a decree. We don't have a specific law for open data, but we have two decrees. One in 2012, which promoted the creation of the platform, and another of 2013, which gave new impetus to the policy and established the default opening. So every piece of data or data set that the city of Buenos Aires has, it has to be open and published in our platform, and except of sensitive information. And also in 2015, the city signed the International Open Data Charter. So, well, a little bit of quick facts and summaries of the ODP of Buenos Aires. We have like 218 datasets, but 1,000 of resources like inside those datasets. We are just migrating from our actual portal to a new portal developed in SICAN, in Andino, which is implementation of the National Open Data Team of SICAN, which has a lot of user experience, better interface. It has an API section, a section called Stories with Data, where we collect all the applications of the open data that we publish. And we estimate to, by the end of the year, to have 3 300 or 315 and 50, sorry, datasets, because we are working with the geospatial data team and the statistics team to shape their data to be open data.
Yeah.
So the number of datasets will increase soon.
Yeah.
Our most popular datasets, and we have similarities here. Like we have Swazi, that is similar to New York City 311, where cities contact the government with to to a work in the street or to make a suggestion or whatever. We have the subway travels every 15 minutes, the amount of travels in each station, and we have the public bicycle system travels, and one which is my favorite is called RUS, is the land use survey. Like in every section of the city, we have the use of the land, like it's a commerce, it's a residential house with a very specific level of detail, because it's like in a live survey, you know, people goes to it and check all the land uses.
Yeah.
Cyrus is the first at the Open Data Index made by Open Knowledge Foundation.
So yeah, I was just saying that it seems like there are a lot of similarities between the popularity of data sets in New York City and Buenos Aires, right? It seems like the classification tends to be a very popular data set in Buenos Aires. So Ramiro, like, give us a sense of who are the users of open data, and how do you even identify who is using it?
Main users are like from the academy, the data science specialists, that data science students. As well, we have identified from the private sector, like companies that use our data or open data, like especially in transportation and construction. We have an API of transportation, of public transportation, that a lot of companies use those data. And we encourage people to use open data by showing their works in this section of the open data portal, stories with data. But also at the beginning, maybe when the open data policy began, we tried to shape community with specialists, and we do hackathons or events like that for shaping the community, and that worked very well. Now we are trying to engage the general public, you know, which is not very familiarized with data. And so that's why we use a lot of our Twitter accounts to share almost everything we do. So to reach more people and make the data, well, we think like the open data is not useful if it's only available. It has to be used by other people and make value and help to economic growth, to research. But now we have just finished with this. We have like something called public challenges, like where we the issues of the government, of areas of the government, and we bring those issues to the data science courses. So the students use these issues and open data to solve these issues. And we connect areas of government with students, and the winners, we publish their works, and also make a presentation of those insights to the government area. So we like do do solve two issues partly with one policy. You know, engaging the areas of government and ministries, and make the open data being used by students.
Yeah, and are some of those projects implemented later on? The projects that people in Buenos Aires make, or?
Yes, let me share 1 second my screen. Can I?
Yeah, for sure.
Wait a minute. This is the new. This is. Can you see? This is the new portal, and these are stories with data. And well, and you click and you go to the URL, and this is a simple visualization, but there are apps or whatever. This is a pollen alert. It's an application that takes the data from trees
Yeah.
and make suitable ways for allergic people, you know, to avoid trees that produce allergy. I don't know if you could understand that. This is the old, no, this is the old portal made in our, it's an own development, and this is based on SICAN, which is way better because it's a technology shared with a lot of open data partners.
Okay, that's awesome. I feel like, yeah. I think the project gallery is very great, and we can touch a little bit about that later. I want to ask Adrian too about the project gallery that exists on New York City Open Data. But Adrian, before that, if you can give us a sense of, you mentioned who the users are of Open Data, but if you can go into the detail of who uses that and for what purposes, give us a sense of who are the people.
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing that's actually very interesting about open data programs is that you don't have a lot of visibility into who your users are, right? So by design, open data is a free government service, but it's also a primary government transparency initiative. So when someone comes and they look at the data, they download the data, they don't have to tell us who they are or why they decide to use that data. I mentioned that we get 30,000 visits to our site on average per week, and we're excited by that. I could not tell you what half of those people are doing on our website though, and that's by design. But from a product management, a marketing perspective, it makes it very challenging to understand, well, who are my users that could use more help? And who are, what are the different types of users that we have a lot of saturation, and then others who aren't using it as much, where we think there's more opportunity. So in 2015, our administration, the mayor in New York City is Mayor Bill de Blasio, put out the vision statement of open data for all, stating that open data is something that could be relevant to everyone. It doesn't mean that we're expecting 8.6 million New Yorkers to be on the platform every day. That's not what that means. But what it does mean is that we think that there's an opportunity for people who might not be a data scientist to actually use this data as well. We know that data scientists, entrepreneurs, companies have the resources and the knowledge to use the platform effectively, and that's fantastic. We want them to keep using it. But as a government program, how can we make an effort to reach communities like students or youth or others who might not have the resources and the knowledge to use this information, and how can we empower them to use this free resource? So while we know that the types of users we have are broad, our outreach efforts have really tried to prioritize reaching out to different communities that are less resourced or might be less knowledgeable about this resource. We don't have a formal public education program, but we have done different trainings at libraries across the city. There's a great civic tech organization in New York City called Beta NYC. There's a national organization in the US called Code for America, and they have different groups in different cities and states across the country. And the one for New York City turned into this group called Beta NYC, and they've been great partners in New York City's Open Data program and in Open Data Week at large. And they themselves actually have a curriculum where they teach different students from the public university here how to use open data. And then those students teach community board members. So at the very hyper local level, we have different community board districts across the city. There are 59, I believe, community boards across the city. And these are volunteers who, commit to helping make decisions and helping manage issues within their community. And so the question has become, well, how can we empower them with open data to do that? And this group, Beta NYC, created a dashboard for every community board that uses 311 data. And they also have a variety of other tools to empower community boards to be making data-driven decisions. So they're one of the best examples of how open data can be used in a very specific use case to drive more data-driven decision-making at the local level. And we're really excited to see how that can grow, but also what other use cases there are, right? And I think that managing a data program is fun and it's interesting because you are a set of tools, right? Data in a lot of ways is, we say, like a hammer looking for a nail. And so what we want to find all of the nails. Like we want the people who have the problems to come to us and for us to figure out how we can better use this resource.
And I would, ask probably the same question from you, Ramiro. I really like, Adrian, when you say, how open data can be used to empower certain groups of people to make their governments accountable, also to create local change. And it's interesting, how those two pillars of open data and open government are connected with each other. Here in New York City, we have a lot of emphasis on open data, but I do know, Ramiro, that Buenos Aires, tries to think of open data as other side of the open government. So I want you to talk a little bit about, what is the connection between both of those things and how making data open, empowers people to make government more transparent.
Okay, first of all, it was really interesting what Adrian told about this training and citizen connected with the community boards and those dashboards. It's a great initiative. And yes, we think like open data and open government are really well connected. Like here in Buenos Aires, it's even the same office of government. Since it was released, Open Data Portal has a lot of information relevant for transparency and make the government accountable. I can mention the salary of officials, the budget, the sanction and executed budget, and the construction works made by Buenos Aires city government, the organization chart, the sworn declarations of the officials. So yes, that's very important. And another part of this is that we have a law of access to public information, which every citizen can ask the government to information, and it's processed in a couple of weeks. The government has to deliver an answer, and this policy is not in charge of our office, but we took every solicitudes or responses to that law or to those requirements, and we deliver that to the areas to make that data open. So first of all, we avoid another citizen in the future try to get those informations because it will be available in the open data portal. And we have a assistant to ask the areas to open the information, and
yeah.
That's like our part on transparency. But also as well, we have developed a product called Vea Obras. It's a portal which is based on open data. It's a data set of the open data portal. It's a big visualization, interactive, of the construction works so the neighbors can follow up the constructions in their neighborhoods, like the stage, like it's finalized, it's in work, it's in project, you know, the budget, they can check photographies, and it's like Adrian said, um, like engaging general public and make the citizen worth the open data, you know, because not only to the specific community, like a service to the citizens.
Yeah, so I think that was great. Like, you know, working in the open data and open government, these are all things that are interrelated with each other, and how different cities are connecting these three different things with each other is always, you know, an interesting thing to learn about. So, what are some of the challenges that you guys have faced in your open data programs, and how do you aim to overcome those? Feel free to also talk about maybe one or two things that you guys plan on doing in the future of your open data program. I will first ask from my colleague Adrian here at NYC to talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Sure. Challenges? What challenges?
No challenges?
So I think that some of the challenges, as I'm sure can be imagined, is that you know, some of the city agencies are maybe less enthusiastic about publishing their data than others. I think that operating in the open and publishing data is, as much as it is seen as a data or a technical initiative, is a lot about culture change and just changing how we think about working with constituents and sharing information about how we operate. And that, I think, is a big culture shift in terms of how certain agencies think. There can be an appetite to really have strong control over what the public understands is happening. And if you release your row-level data about your operations, you're making available a lot of really granular information about how you work. And that requires, you know, a certain level of confidence in how you're operating, and also letting go a little bit of the control of someone might use this data and do the wrong analysis and actually like have the wrong idea about how we operate. And that's a bit of a risk, you know, like you lose control over what the message is when you're putting the data out there. And that's something that I think has been a very big shift for our agencies. And I've been really proud of the city agencies here in New York and how they have adopted the mandates of New York City's open data program, but there is still what I like to call a spectrum of enthusiasm around open data. We have our open data champions who are, you know that every meeting they're in, they're talking about open data, but you have other folks who maybe only think about it a few times a year when it's time to meet the different compliance initiatives. So I think that is an ongoing challenge. The other piece is, I tell people that, you know, we have 2,300 data sets on open data. I can't tell you if that's 5% or 95% of all of the data that should be on open data. Like, we don't have a comprehensive list of all of the data across the city that should be on open data. Now, that being said, there have been a number of initiatives over the last few years that have given us more visibility into the city's complete inventory, but it's still a work in progress and really wrapping our arms around just kind of how large New York City is. And when you can imagine that everything from a database system to an Excel spreadsheet qualifies as data, and like which of those qualify as public data, and the fact that we have 300,000 people we're working with, do they all know about open data? Probably not, you know. So it's an ongoing process to figure out, well, what is the universe of things that should be on our platform for our users to access? But I'm confident that as open data becomes less of a shiny new initiative and more of just the normal way we all operate, that we'll get to a place to where most of the data that's required to be on there will be on there. So.
Okay.
Adrian, you know, do you want to talk about one or two things that the city of New York is aiming up to do in recent near future?
Thanks for reminding me that I forgot to answer the second part of your question. So in terms of upcoming initiatives, a few of the things that are underway, we've been really trying to figure out how do we open up our governance structure a little bit more, like as an open data program that's an open government initiative. How do we make sure that as a program we're operating in the open? And so a part of that is we've been making ourselves much more accessible to our users and the public, being very forthright with where we are as a program. And two of the initiatives to kind of help on the governance front is we've been asked a few times how we work with youth. And we didn't have a very good answer. So what we did is we stood up a youth leadership council. So we have that underway right now. We have a group of 10 youth from across the city who meet with us once every 2 weeks. They'll be meeting with us through June, and they're learning what open data is. They're meeting with, other students at their school. They just met with other youth from across the city yesterday as a part of Open Data Week. And they're going to be giving us recommendations on how we can, keep youth top of mind when we're working on open data. So that's something that is underway that we're excited about. And then with Open Data Week, we just announced an Open Data Advisory Council. So we have a lot of great partners across the city and people that we can reach out to for support, but we hadn't ever really formalized those engagements. And we also know that, there are some people who, once they have your email address, are, more dedicated to emailing you when something is wrong than others. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a place and a platform for people who might not be as loud or as adamant about emailing to also have a voice when we're sharing what our strategic initiatives are. So definitely wanting to continue conversations with people we're already in touch with, but also recognizing, well, what are the gaps? What are the communities that don't have a seat at the table right now in having the visibility into how we operate, and how do we create a place for them? So our Open Data Advisory Council is meant to help capture communities all across the city and to really help inform things that we're missing and opportunities that we could be spending more time on. So it's an experiment for us. It's a group that's going to be meeting twice a year over the next 2 years. So it's really only 4 meetings that we're talking about, but we do hope to engage them over email, to really cultivate them as champions for the program, and to have them help guide the work that we're doing.
That was fantastic, Adrian. With a population of more than 8 million, it's always a challenge to figure out how to involve every community.
We share a couple of challenges with New York City, make or convince government areas to open their data. We want to attack that with these public challenges to connect those areas with the students, to show them that if they're open their data, they add a lot of value to those data, and they can improve changes in society. Other challenges we are facing is to ensure data quality, and we are improving data cleaner open to the public, published in our GitHub, and we have published open data guides with all the standards that we want for the data. And another challenge, I think, it's privacy, because there are no clear rules about what is sensitive information and what's not, and that brings to starts to alerts, don't know what to publish, and maybe the government areas can open the data on the argument that are sensitive data. And some of our future goals, and later I answer about the community level. Well, we have your new portal based on SICAM. We are developing one data dashboard for government intern to check the state of the metadata of the portal. And then in the future, we want to make a public data dashboard like Chile has, which shows insights and important facts of the data for those people who doesn't want the raw data, but want some insights or information in the portal. And we are adopting the open contracting standard because we think that's really important in order for the transparency and to make to ensure the traceability of the data, because we have the information in our buying system, but these international standards allow us to share with more people internationally the information. And we are redefining the open data policy, making data champions or data leaders in each of government areas. And we have done a pilot of, like John said, inventory of metadata to look all of the data that the government has, that is huge, but in order to know how how much it's open, how much could be opened, and well, at the community level, that's I don't know if to say a weak point, but it's challenging as well. We do closeness meetings where the mayor or the vice mayor goes and talks with the neighbors, and we try. We bring open data projects to those meetings and explain specifically with Vea Obras, like the construction works portal, because it's really has an engagement power, a very big engagement power. And there are a lot of more stuff, but I know we are short on time, so maybe we can answer the questions.
There are two questions I want to ask.
A little low, but okay.
I want to ask one question from you, Ramiro, and one from Adrian, based on the nature of the question. So, Adrian, if you can talk about what the city of New York is doing in terms of maintaining a high quality of data and a high quality of metadata to make sure that other people understand what's inside the data. Give us a sense of what that is.
I would say that that's a work in progress, and in the same way that I mentioned that there's enthusiasm about open data, there's also different city agencies are at different maturity levels when it comes to understanding data and using data. And I think that there are also certain city agencies who have more sensitive data than others, and that also makes a very big difference because there's a much steeper learning curve in spreading that knowledge of how to use that data in a safe way across the agency. I think that, but the more using data to substantiate decision-making or resource allocation, the more that there's a demand for that from leadership, the more there's going to be consideration of data as an asset that needs to be maintained and taken care of. So one thing that we have is through the Open Data program is we have a designated Open Data Coordinator at every city agency. And they're the ones who've identified and know the different data owners within their agency. So it's not the Open Data Coordinator who's managing all of the different data sets. They really act as a liaison. So they're the ones who know all of their different divisions, all of the different people who manage a different data set. And I think that there's a shift we need to make in thinking about managing a data set as an important part of your job, not just a thing you do for open data, or not just, and I think database administrators are seen as roles that have that kind of responsibility, but it's something that needs to spread even to what's considered a more basic data set.
And it's really exciting to hear about the standards that you guys are looking to adopt. I mean, we have geospatial standards, and I think there's a lot of discussion around other standards that would be useful, but getting people to collect data differently, to commit to new ways of collecting data upstream is a little difficult. So it means changing how people work, and that also has implications for decision-making processes downstream. So it's a pretty big lift to figure out, which standards make sense, how to actually adopt them and implement them, and then the enforcement to make sure people are actually sticking to them and using them. But I think there was also a question about preparing our workforce from outside of open data, but within the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, we've built up a community of practice for different analysts across the city that we call the Analytics Exchange. There isn't any dedicated skills building as a commitment to that right now, but what we've really done is recognize that, there might be an analyst at the Department of Education who has very similar problems to an analyst at the Department of Transportation. And the reality is that they're not in the same building. They don't know, have each other's email addresses. They have very different titles, but they might be doing very similar things, just for very different programs. So our first step was just how do we break down the government silos and help people who do similar work find each other and build up a peer network so that if they have an issue, they can reach out. We're also trying to get a better understanding of common themes and challenges that analysts face across the city. So that we, as for us, a data scientist in the mayor's office and the leadership on our team can really go to bat for and help showcase the fact that these are issues that are preventing the adoption and growth of data-driven work across the city and trying to help solve those problems. So that's in the very early stages, but something that we recognize as a need if we're going to, because that has trickle-down effects for open data. Because the more data literate your workforce is, the more they're going to pay attention to how they're collecting it, the quality of it, and that's going to help improve open data in the long run. It's not going to happen in 2 weeks, over the course of a few years.
Absolutely, it definitely takes time, and would like to pitch in a little bit about the data standards as well. We are coming up with an initiative called Metadata for All. As Adrian mentioned, there are different communities who are using or interpreting data standards in different ways. So how do we consolidate all those different thoughts and make sure that the data sets are understandable by all the people is something that we have been working towards. Ramiro, why don't you talk about, you mentioned earlier that there are some projects that people and data scientists do in Buenos Aires, and you try to set up meetings with government officials on those projects. Give us a little bit sense of how do you go about training the city officials who work in the government, and what are some of the, who are your friends in the city government who are also championing open data?
It's one point of similarity what Adrian said, some areas are more engaged and knows more about data in general and open data in specific, but our direction not only cares about open data, but we also coordinate the data general policy in the government, and we are defining with other areas the new policy of data. And we also have these meetings called Mesa de Datos, that is data table, when all the parts or officials which work with data in government joins to us and tell us their case studies, or we talk about some issue or how to solve one problematic in the government, all involved with data. So, and we are doing some data science courses for government officials, and it's open for all government, and we are spreading it to our network, but it's it's reaching some part of the government that we don't know and we don't have much contact, so that's really useful. And that can allow to those people to open their data, with more tools for using the data, cleaning the data, or data wrangling in general, makes more easier to open to the public with high quality standards.
Yeah, no, I think this is fantastic. Data science courses from your side and communities of practice. I think there's like a lot to learn from these two different cities.
It's a wonderful feedback. There is a lot of work to do, but with partners in each area of government, because I don't know about health data. I don't know. I'm a sociologist, but they know, and with that connection, it's very useful.
Yeah. So that has been great, Ramiro. On that note, let's end the note on the Open Gov Week, which is happening next week. Would you like to say a line or two about that?
Yes, we're having our Open Data Week next week from 11 to 15. And we are not streaming the events, but we'll share all the experiences in our Twitter account, like twitter.com, but the last URL. And there we'll post everything about our Open Data Week. Like we are doing courses, workshops, talks, and I don't know specifically, but some of those will be recorded, I think. And you can check our GitHub as well, like --datosgcba, where we try to publish every project we are into, and all the things I mentioned in this webinar are updated there. And that's it. And of course, the open data link, that the new portal will be available like next week, or maybe the other one.
Yeah, no, I think this is fantastic. Let us know if you need anything for next week. We're happy to.
Okay, yes, I'll let you know. But I haven't mentioned, it was a pleasure to participate in this webinar, and we are really thankful for joining you and exchange all this information and opinions. And
yeah, no, I agree with you. It was such a pleasure to learn more about the work that Buenos Aires team is also doing, because honestly, I feel like in the end, both of us are global cities. We have, a lot of same challenges and opportunities to work together. And I think this webinar was intended to talk about some of those common challenges and, work towards one common goal. So thank you on that note to Ramiro and everybody who took part in this webinar. Yeah, if there are any thoughts or anything, these are our email addresses. You can also follow us on Twitter to get up to date on what are other events happening in New York City and in Buenos Aires next week.